When you walk into a bookstore, do you immediately go to the section where your favorite genre lives, or do you like to stop at the front tables to see what's popular? I myself make a beeline to the romance section, and then I take a lap around the store. I do know what I like at this point, but I am a naturally curious person. Every so often, general fiction will catch my eye. The kinds of books that are tailor-made to be picked up by a production company in hopes that they will turn into Best Picture nominees. But like I said, it's pretty rare that I pick up these kinds of books. What isn't, however, is my desire to read popular books from Goodreads lists, tell you my thoughts and feelings. Bookstore table? Goodreads curated list? Yeah. And it's like they knew exactly what I needed, because just as I was getting curious about genres outside of my usual, it popped out a list of the 80 most popular fiction books of the past decade. This list was particularly interesting to me too, because it's more than just a retrospective. Goodreads picked the most popular books on the site based on currently reading, want to read, and read shelves, and then they sorted by publishing year. So the data is as of right now. What books were popular when they were published, but also what books have sort of stood the test of time and popularity. Like what in 2016 are people still reaching for today? Specifically, the most popular book of each decade. Reading experience, I will say, was stressful leading up to this, to say the least. Human condition, I think, is such that the most popular books are usually sad or horrifying or boring or some combination of all three, but it did take me a while to work my way through all of them. And between books, I definitely had to take a break to take some time for myself, either picking up a romance or spending some time in the Calm app, who are sponsoring this portion of today's video. Calm is the #1 app for sleep and meditation, giving you the power to calm your mind and change your life. Everyone is going through something, whether it's stress at work or anxiety at home, and mental health is not one size fits all. Calm offers a wide range of content that can help you navigate through life's ups and downs. Meditations that can help you work through anxiety and stress, boost your focus, build healthier habits, and take better care of your physical well-being. Lately in the mornings, when I have been getting ready for my day, I've been listening to different guided meditations to really center myself and set the mood for my day. This morning, I actually listened to the stress and burnout support from Dr. Aditi Nurikar. It was the perfect way to get my mind centered for the day ahead. Calm also have sleep stories, sleep meditations, and calming music that will help you drift off to sleep quickly and naturally. They also have grounding exercises for when you're feeling overwhelmed. They're really cool, actually. They're like these short guided sessions using sensation, movement, and breath work to help you relax and reset. And Calm has expert-led talks to help you handle things like grief, improve self-esteem, and care for your relationships. Calm puts the tools you need right in your pocket and can help you dedicate a few minutes a day to a happier, healthy life. And for my viewers, Calm is offering an exclusive offer of 40% off a Calm premium subscription at calm.com/ChandlerA. Go to calm.com/ChandlerA for 40% off unlimited access to Calm's entire library. Again, that's calm.com/ChandlerA. Now that we're all in the right headspace, I'm going to take you through the 10 most popular books of the past decade, and we can figure out which ones stand the test of time and which one you should take off of your want to read shelf. I don't think I've ever wanted a question answered more than this one. Do you think Amor Towles is familiar with Eloise at the Plaza? Because A Gentleman in Moscow is awfully similar. But like if Eloise were a Russian man during the Bolshevik Revolution on house arrest in a fancy hotel. You're probably thinking that that's a bit of a stretch given the dissimilarities in characters, but I'd argue that Rostov and Eloise are not that different in their life approaches. Both are woefully out of place in their hotels, both have a zest for life that can't be tamed, both make unexpected friendships that warm the cockles of the heart. And sure, maybe Eloise isn't supposed to teach us the meaning of life. I'd argue that A Gentleman in Moscow doesn't really do much of that either, despite its intended purpose. Now, I picked this book up last year for a project not unlike this one that I didn't actually end up carrying out. I'll be honest, this book did not leave much of an impression on me. I actually struggled to know what to say about this book. I feel like it's written well enough, like all of the books on this list, frankly, but it's a kind of message that I've connected with better in different places. I think the advantage of this book is the strange and unexpected location and attention to a time in history that I don't think about very often. But if neither interests you, I think you can find lessons on the human condition in more memorable books. I would wager that the most popular book on Goodreads outside of like the Bible or the Quran has to be Seven Husbands of Evelyn Hugo. This book was buzzed about when I first joined BookTube over 6 years ago, and it still seems to be a go-to recommendation for people getting into reading for the first time. It's got that mix of Hollywood glamour, tragedy, and intrigue that I think has a relatively mass appeal. But reading it with a critical lens, which I did even back in 2019 when I was new to this, I had a lot of issues with it. This book follows Evelyn Hugo, who is a mashup of all of the different Golden Age actresses like Elizabeth Taylor, Marilyn Monroe, and Rita Hayworth. This renowned actress in her 70s is being interviewed by a rando about her career and her many failed marriages, spilling all of the secrets that she's been keeping hidden for years, like her Cuban background, her bisexuality, and many wrongdoings, frankly. And to Reed's credit, it is a compulsively readable book. I wanted to unfold the secrets of this woman that I really loved to hate. But that's where my compliments kind of end. I hated Evelyn. And I find it ironic that she says to Monique, her interviewer, that she is this intensely hateable person, she's done bad things, they're gonna come out in this interview, because I think the reader is supposed to ultimately still like and kind of sympathize with her. I just found that I mostly never did. Sure, a lot of Evelyn's choices were born out of the circumstances of the time period that she was, raised in and growing up in, but a lot weren't. She was just kind of awful, and I think TJR seemed to have too much fun having Evelyn say some pretty unforgivable shit to her one true love when fighting, or like really unforgivable things that like even a teenager wouldn't say to like someone they were in a fight with. I don't know, it was a little bit wild to me. Secondly, this book is readable, but with that comes the end of chapter cliffhanger cliches or slammed home messages, those like one-liner sentences at the end of a chapter that are supposed to be really poignant. Yeah, there's not a lot of subtlety in TJR's writing, and I don't really love being told how to feel. Third, and probably my biggest issue, is the way that race is handled in this book. Now, in hindsight, having some years between reading this book and now, I can see that race is a little more complicated in this book than I thought it was when I first read it. Some of the choices, for instance, that Evelyn makes are not necessarily endorsed by the author as right choices, and some are, again, born simply because of circumstance. But there definitely are still some interesting choices when it comes to the way that Evelyn interacts with people of color in this book. Specifically with regards to the interviewer, where I couldn't find a justification for the choice, even in a literary sense. Now, do I personally like and recommend this book? No. Do I think this book is popular for a reason? Absolutely. I finally did it, y'all. I read the Crawfish book. Where the Crawdads Sing by Delia Owens is a book that has been on other lists for videos that I've made, and I either can't get it checked out from my library in time, or I find a way to justify not reading it. But I did read this book about a week ago, and it's still very fresh in my mind. Fresh like a steaming pile of horseshit on a cold winter's day, one might say. I think the best way to start with this one is just painting a picture on what it's about, right? So our main character, Kaya, grows up in the marshes of North Carolina in the 60s with her mom, dad, and siblings, until one by one, they abandon her. And it's not like she's done anything wrong, they just have other shit to do and places to be. So Kaya finds ways to avoid school, avoid human contact mostly, finds a way to make a living, and connect with Mother Nature. That last part is quite important, right? And along the way, she attracts boys in her young adulthood because although she can't read or write, she has a banging body and an insane knowledge of the earth that's really getting the menfolk going. Except one of these menfolk who winds up dead, and now Kaya is on trial for his murder, which really puts a wrench in her publishing of encyclopedic books on the biology of the native marshlands. Does eventually learn to read and write, by the way, by the non-dead man that she bangs. Try not to throw around the word drivel loosely, but good God, this was bad. There's a total lack of believability around nearly every facet of this story. There's basically no reason for this girl to be abandoned by both of her parents and her siblings. Like, she has siblings, older siblings, and it just feels crazy to me that they wouldn't wonder, I wonder where Kaya is. Maybe we should figure that shit out. No reason why the school system wouldn't make sure that she goes to school, how she could publish books with no formal education. And if that wasn't bad enough, like, what is the fucking point of this book? The resiliency of human beings, finding love in a hopeless place, living off the land, I just really couldn't tell you. And don't get me started, again, on how poorly race is handled in this book, or I should say how it isn't handled in this book. Most of the time, I understand what attracts people to stories, even if they're not for me. This time, I don't understand how this book was published. Skip City, baby, you can do so much better than this book. I get more and more particular in my old age. I really enjoy books that read more like short stories, but only if they're about different generations of people that are interconnected. Not in a concurrent sort of way. Like, I don't want 3 different points of view that all converge at the end of the story, kind of like The Lost Apothecary or Bury Our Bones in the Midnight Soil. I want like 4 to 6 chapter chunks, a snapshot into one person's life, and then we move on to the next person, never to revisit that first person again. And you're probably like, what the fuck are you talking about? Or those two things don't sound all that different, but they are. And Girl, Woman, Other is a phenomenal example of the latter. Now, I picked this book up last week with absolutely no knowledge of what kind of book this would be. It essentially follows the life of Black women in England. We've got a lesbian theater owner, we've got a school teacher, a shop manager, the list goes on. Different ages, different life circumstances, all sort of tied together, but most importantly, all unique and interesting in a way that made me not want to put down the audiobook at any point. Because my favorite books are ones where the characters are interesting and I learn something, and this book had both. Each character has has such unique life circumstances, and none are solely there to teach you something new, but through their life experiences, you do learn something anyway. There's themes of sexual assault and healing, familial obligation and cultural expectation, domestic abuse in same-sex relationships, the complicated landscape of privilege. Again, none of the characters or their stories can be reduced simply to those themes. Despite the book not spending tons of time with each character, they just felt so incredibly real. Just genuinely a phenomenal and engrossing read. This one you definitely have to pick up. A book similar in its ability to weave messages through a compelling narrative, though different in the way it goes about it, would be The Vanishing Half by Britt Bennett, a book I read back when it was released in 2020. Now for that reason, it is less fresh in my mind than some of these others, but I'm going to do my best to tell you why you should read it. The story follows twin sisters Stella and Desiree. Both are Black women living in the 1950s in a small town craving a different kind of life. Their life circumstances change as they get older, such that they end up leaving their small town and embarking on two very different paths. Stella winds up married to a white man. She is white passing herself, and they end up having a baby girl who believes that she is white. Desiree ends up with a darker-skinned Black man having a daughter who is Black and cannot pass as white, and her life experience, of course, looks very different than Stella's daughter. This book is told in bits and pieces over the courses of each woman's life, how they ultimately intersect when their daughters meet. It's a really compelling book that looks at race and class and colorism and relationships up close, neither woman's life really turning out the way that they expect or that I, as the reader, expected. Again, made it really compelling and interesting. I think this is definitely one that you need to pick up. Okay, well, remember when I said that I like a very particular kind of multi-POV story? Loud Cuckoo Land is not that kind of multi-POV story. It's the kind with three disparate timelines and storylines that ultimately converge as the story carries on, in this case, interweaving to form a tapestry of solace and resilience, a tale of hope and profound human connection. If that weren't enough of a not my thing sort of situation, this book is 626 pages long, 15 hours long, and damn near impossible to understand via audiobook. Perhaps I'm stupid, and I'm sure you'll let me know in the comments down below, but since I wasn't a huge fan of this author's book, All the Light We Cannot See, I don't think I'm missing out on much. I mean, if you like these kind of multi-POV woven stories, try it and report back. Now, I promise I finished the last 3 books on this list. I also just couldn't bring myself to finish Demon Copperhead. About Cuckoo Land, I got like 20-30 minutes into before noping out. Demon Copperhead, I got like 2 to 3 hours into before realizing that life just doesn't get better if you live in Southern Appalachia, I guess. Or at least that's how Barbara Kinsolver sees it. Now, listen, I was forced to read the Poisonwood Bible back in high school, and unlike the 29 other students in my AP English class, I did actually enjoy it. So I didn't go into this book assuming that I would hate it. That part came later. And with reflection, I think my problem is that it is incredibly hard for me to connect to stories written by people who have no experience with what they're writing about. Now, I'm not expecting a thriller writer to have murdered someone in real life. They don't need to lend that sort of authenticity to the page. But if someone is writing a story where the themes are racism and colorism, for instance, I would hope they would be drawing from their own experiences. Maybe hope is the wrong word here, but I certainly don't have interest in reading a white person's attempt at touching on these subjects through the eyes of a Black character, for instance. From my understanding, the author here is from Kentucky, but I don't think she grew up in poverty personally affected by the opioid epidemic and in custody of Child Protective Services. I think her dad's a doctor. Now, it's not my intention to say that certain people can't write certain stories. I think that conversation is tricky and nuanced, and it just really isn't the point here. The point is individual reader experience. I personally would rather read a fictional account from someone who has been up close and personal with the subject matter they're writing about, or read a nonfiction book about the subject matter, because this book, what I read of it, is just unrelenting sadness, and it didn't seem to have a particular angle that it was trying to take or a message that I was supposed to be gleaning from it. So I guess hats off to Barbara for not sugarcoating things, but also I didn't gain anything from what I did read, so this is a skip. Finally got my Patchet cherry popped, y'all, which is a decidedly disgusting metaphor, but also sort of apt here because the characters in this book live on a cherry farm. Basically, Laura's in her 50s, living on a family orchard in Michigan, and it is the pandemic. So her 3 daughters are back home, and they're desperate to learn the story of how their mom once dated the famous actor Peter Duke. But Laura is the kind of storyteller that fucking meanders, so we get the long story of how she became an actress, and what her 20s looked like, and how she fell in love and spent time at this place called Tom Lake. It was a theater company that was the catalyst for a lot of things in her life. And amongst the meandering, we get the daughters asking questions, and we get insight into their personalities and their own lives and what Laura's life looks like today, and it was a perfectly serviceable listen while I meandered around a local lake myself. But as a story that really said anything profound or made me feel big emotions, The general consensus on Goodreads for this book in particular is that it is pretty fucking boring, and I do have to agree. The saving grace here is really that Meryl Streep is a good narrator. Now, I think the themes listed in the synopsis of youthful love versus married love, lives parents lead before they have children, etc., they were mostly lost on me. I'm not saying they weren't here, they just didn't really do much for me. For the patch heads out there, I think you could probably, read this and enjoy it. For the rest of us, I think your time is better spent elsewhere. I wish I had a pithy one-liner for The Women by Kristen Hanna, but I have talked about this book and Vietnam so much in the past year that I really cannot be bothered. Women is a book about nursing student Frankie, who thinks that being a wartime nurse sounds like a good time. So she gets over there and realizes, oh fuck, not such a good time. And after serving said time, she comes back and realizes that not only does life seem stupid and meaningless by comparison, but also everybody wants her to get on with her own life and never talk about her experiences and wildly bad PTSD. So she ends up making a series of bad choices, like sleeping with a married man and going on drink and drug-filled rides around Southern California, all while we are dragged along behind her, just waiting for it all to stop or, I don't know, change course. It's just not a fun read. It is an important one, I will say. I think that Vietnam is a war that people didn't really talk about and frankly still don't talk about enough. It was unpopular, and as a result, I think the people who served there, especially the women, don't get talked about very much with respect or care. So I really appreciate Kristen Hanna for shining light on that time period and people who I don't think get talked about or thought about enough. It seems to be something she's focusing on more lately with her releases, though I do wish she would rein in some of the soapiness at times. Frankie's actions, they were a touch over the top in a way that couldn't be explained by circumstances. That being said, still worth the read. I live a lot of my life online, and I recognize that I could stand to touch grass more often, but when I think of Broken Country by Claire Leslie Hull, the first thing that comes to mind is messy boots, y'all. This book is the very definition. It gives General Hospital a run for its money. This book I finished yesterday, which makes it fresher than cut grass in the old noggin, and maybe for that reason it's a book that I'm having a very hard time deciding how I feel about. Reese's book club pick feels tailor-made for a big screen. It's about a woman named Beth who is married to a farmer named Frank, and their 9-year-old son has recently passed away. The story itself, though, begins when a dog attacks some sheep on the family farm. The dog is shot, and the little boy who is the owner of said dog freaks the fuck out, understandably. The little boy is the son of Beth's high school sweetheart who is back in the village writing his next novel. Beth had no idea he was there. And Beth, she feels really bad about the dead dog and ends up connecting with this little boy. Oh, also, there's a huge murder trial going on, and Beth's husband, Frank, he is in fact the dude on trial. Do we know who he killed? No. The book kind of chronicles Beth and her high school sweetheart's romance back in the day, their present-day romance, Beth and Frank's connection, the story of the dead son, and it's sad and kind of poignant and so wildly over the top that I just couldn't help but laugh at times, frankly. I do think, though, that despite the corniness, it did actually have an interesting take on love and loss, and it did kind of get me to reflect on right versus wrong in certain situations. Is this a book that I truly believe is going to stand the test of time or stay with me for multiple years to come and deserves a place among the greats in literature? Resounding no. So I can't understand why this book was set in the 60s and 70s, because there was absolutely no historical element, in my humble opinion. I think it was just done that way to make it feel more literary. I don't know. Should you pick it up? If you like the drama, yeah, go ahead. So those are the most popular books of the past decade, and I think while those books haven't necessarily defined my decade of reading, they do sort of speak to my own observations of fiction over the years. Some books are total standouts regardless of when you pick them up. Some are very much of a time, but still relevant today. And some, I think, don't have particularly strong themes, but are easy enough and have universal appeal. I can't say that this video and this reading experience has changed my personal taste in book genres all that much. I think it's still hard for me to find general or historical fiction that really speaks to me or delivers messages in my preferred way. But I definitely have a couple of new favorites on my list after embarking on this journey. I'd love to know which of these books you have personally read, which you've loved, and what your best books of the past 10 years are. Also, let me know if you would like to see my own version of this. I think it'd be really fun to attempt a general fiction version or maybe a romance version, like picking what I think the best romance of 2016 was. You guys let me know. Or just comment a cherry emoji if you were feeling lazy but you stuck with me this entire time. But thanks so much for watching. I love y'all so much, and I'll see you in the next one.